All right, so I did my Ph.D. studies in leadership development, and my dissertation is actually on using self-narration as a tool to empower personal awareness and self-efficacy in undergraduate leadership students. So I took an interpersonal leadership course at the graduate level, which is one of my first courses at the University of Florida. And in this course, we had to stand in front of our classmates. And unlike the undergraduate level, where you had about 5 to 7 minutes, ours had to be at least 20 minutes. So Brandon was in that classroom as well, and we realized it was very difficult for us to share our story because we didn't have a space to do that. This was the first time, even as graduate students, for someone to ask, what is your story? And they allowed you time for a classroom. It's a grade to look at yourself. So from that experience, it was a dynamic change in how we approach life, how we approach education, how we approach our relationships and community. So from that class, we established self-narrate. And from self-narrate grew StoryGNV. And all that came from implementing story into education. So we're excited to have other panelists who some have experience and have been a part of this class. I've met people on this panel from that class. And so just seeing how we carry and utilize story to empower educational environments. Is it okay if we leave this door cracked? It's a little stuffy.
Yes.
I think the
Yes,
treasure
please.
chest is blocking our air. We're in a church, so you gotta improvise, but I think we have a good breeze coming in. So if at any point this becomes too much, just let me know. But I'm going to sit down and I'm going to allow the panelists to briefly describe who they are and how you all use story within your field. So, that's that.
Great. Well, hi everyone. I'm Lisa D'Souza. I work at UF in the Hefner School of Business. I'm the director for career and leadership programs. And so we have a lot of different programs to help our students develop their soft skills, leadership skills, and things that are going to make them successful out in the real world. And I've only just dabbled in the community of storytelling. We brought an event recently to UF called the Human Library, and it's an innovative kind of diversity learning kind of activity that really uses storytelling. So I've been blown away by how powerful that is and excited to kind of share what I've learned with you today.
I'm Joy Rumble. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication, as well as the Center for Public Issues Education. And I approach storytelling from a little different perspective. I don't work with undergraduate students. I don't teach. I have a research and extension appointment. So the way that I have used storytelling is with small farmers and with extension agents out in practice in an applied setting to help them to be able to connect with the public, since agriculture has become so disconnected from the public today that helping them to tell their story is helping them to connect to the public again and helping to kind of bridge the divide between agricultural and natural resource issues.
My name's Jana Magette. I was there when greatness started with Jaron, and Brandon in that AEC interpersonal leadership class. Also got my Ph.D. from AEC. So currently my role is executive director of Girls Place, which is a nonprofit up on 39th across from Sonic, because everybody knows where Sonic is. Don't say you don't. And in that role, we use storytelling, first of all from a branding standpoint, sharing our story about our program and organization, because we're grassroots. There's no one else like us. We've been in Gainesville 30 years, so that kind of stuff. Using it with the girls in a variety of ways, and we'll kind of get more into that, but anything from conflict resolution to making connections. And then to keep my sanity, I also do some leadership consulting. Since I went to school and got the Ph.D., I figure I should use it. And I have a LLC on the side called Go Follow Lead, and I usually work with college athletic programs, because that's what my life was like before nonprofit. I played college basketball, and so in that role, using story to promote vulnerability, create connection, and really kind of create these safe, authentic environments for teams that usually can't do that on their own. So.
Hi everyone, my name is Siraj. So similarly, as was discussed here, there's some kind of a driving impulse, motivating factor kind of grew out of my doctoral work, which was essentially centered on exploring how individuals make meaning through change experiences, right? And those change experiences may be those that cause great dissonance. They may not be self-determined. They may have been something that happened, and there may be a reactionary component to that. So I kind of took that work, and it led into two different spaces. One is an identity that I have within the College of Medicine, and I do a lot of work with first-year grad students, health professions grad students, and I'll discuss some of that today because it's that similar process of meaning making, but doing so in a kind of a space in which they all share, and it's very cross-functional, that gives them an understanding of what it means or what one another's experiences mean along this continuum of care, right? So that's one way that story is manifested as very valuable in that particular space. And another space is a workshop that I do. It's called the Sustaining Wellness Workshop, right? So that's something that's applied in multiple spaces, whether it's with addiction and recovery populations, rehabilitation populations, and other populations throughout the UF health space. And that is a workshop that uses narrative exchange also to kind of co-locate experiences around something that is kind of a shared event in people's lives. And that's also something that I'll kind of discuss in terms of how that space has manifested as something that has transformed storytelling experience into a very intentional therapeutic experience for these individuals. So thank you. Appreciate it.
So, as you can see, we have a very diverse group of panelists. And so as we go through this panel discussion, I'll ask us a series of questions. But if at any point in time you see something that resonates with you, resounds with you, please jump in, because we love, even as educators, we like to give feedback and to learn we can do what we do better. So if you see an instructor talking about how to use it in classrooms and you have experience as a student, explain how that has affected you. You can see that within your experience. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to throw that hand up and say, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about this. I'm interested because, and so we really want this to be a very free-form, open space where we can grow together. So I guess we'll get started with one of the first discussions. And like I said, you can come up with questions on your own along the way as well. But just to get the ball rolling, we all have used story in some way, shape, or form in our educational environments. What are some of the personal experiences or compelling arguments that have influenced your thinking around story? How have they motivated you to get involved in being an advocate for utilizing story within your work?
How many questions was that?
So we'll start with the first. What are some of the personal experiences or compelling arguments that have influenced your thinking around story?
Okay, so, the first thing I can think of is really sitting in Tony's class, and when we got the assignment to have to get up in front of people that you kind of know and talk about yourself for 20 minutes, or a sliver of your life, or the whole lot, like whatever you're going to talk about, like that was a pretty intimidating task. And so like just that right there just kind of made me think like, okay, why is it so hard? And okay, this in the process of why is it hard, why am I struggling this, and having opportunity to reflect and go through that process was pretty amazing for me individually. And so I think that was like my first moment when I was like, there's something here with this whole storytelling thing. So
for me, it was a little different, and from the standpoint of I was doing a lot of research on issues in ag natural resources, and I kept coming across the same thing, is that the science isn't getting through. The science is not being communicated well about agriculture and natural resource issues. And so what I was finding is that people really needed to connect to a person. They needed to connect on an emotional level. And so storytelling was a way to help people to begin to connect with the issues, but also to help the industry reconnect with the public. And so for me, it really came out of my research and finding how to overcome some of those roadblocks that I was seeing.
I think for me, in the Havner School of Business, our student population isn't very diverse, when you look from like an ethnic or racial standpoint. And so when we talk about issues of diversity, we're talking in these generalities and in a classroom setting, and we try to make it personal. And students are not quite at a place where they're ready sometimes, freshman students, to share their own identities and experiences. And so those discussions are really limited. And when I heard about this Human Library event, it's a worldwide kind of social movement. So it happens all over the world. And we thought, like, why don't we try to bring it here to UF? As we started planning it, and as I started working with the folks who tell their stories at the event, I myself was just so, like, overwhelmed by how the connection was. Just spending 5 minutes talking to someone, hearing their story in relation to this event made me feel like I knew them. And I've Facebooked all of them since then. But, just hearing something, and they tell personal stories of hardship and resilience. And so when you hear someone's story like that, you never forget that. That connection is so much more powerful than anything we can do in the classroom. And so in planning the event, and then in actually seeing the event come to fruition, realizing how powerful that was for our students, and nothing that we can do in the classroom can really compare to sitting down human to human and sharing a story.
I love that you mentioned that human to human aspect, because I think it's so important to like community building, but as well, like as you mentioned, diversity. Because you think about how often do we have spaces where we share stories with individuals who either are not like-minded or have the same interests or look or act the same way. And sharing story, having that space where human to human interaction, you see that though thoughts might be different, lived experiences might be different, we all have those same internal feelings and emotions of wanting a place, wanting to feel at home, wanting to feel equal, and this breaks all of those stereotypes, the things that we think we know about another person, and realize that though we may be different, we are very similar.
Yes.
And, so I love that part, that aspect of the story. Thank you for sharing.
So, just building on what Jaron said, I mean, that's kind of what was the experience in my life that kind of was a driving factor, not only for my doctoral research, but also what drove all the rest of what I'm doing now. And it began in a space many years ago in school improvement, right? So big grant, go, fix, do kind of thing. And we're like, we have no idea where to start. These are cultures of dissonance. There's top down, there's, pedagogies of the oppressed. There's a lot of issues that are occurring just within a culture that one would assume works to some degree of harmony. But it wasn't, even in small schools. It was very siloed. There was a lot of disconnect. So the initial project that we embarked on was to develop essentially what came to be a safe space for narrative exchange, right? So this work, and this was done through a space within the College of Education. It's called the Lastinger Center, on learning. So this work was amazing because it was yielding so much gain based on something that was such a simple concept. Is come together, remove the mask that we wear on a daily basis, and when we come into this room, we check in at the door and say, when we're here, all we're doing is existing as storytellers. It was an equalizer. So whether it was a first-year teacher or a long-term jaded principal, perhaps. I don't know, but everyone came together, and dissonance was revealed, and biases were revealed, and connections were revealed, and connections were made, and those connections yielded measurable outcomes. So this was a profound use of story and connection, and that transformed my way of thinking. I mean, from then on, that was it. This is my bread and butter. So that's what kind of drove the rest of what I was doing, and the rest is history, right? So
I love it. And thank you all, the four of you, for being on our panel and showing those different perspectives of how it's important. But we also want to turn it over to you all. There's a reason you all chose to come and sit in on this panel discussion. So there's something that you either utilized in terms of story within the work that you do, or you had questions. So I wanted to turn the question over to anyone in the audience as well. If you all have been a part of a few of these experiences, what were some of those compelling arguments or having that lived experience of seeing story work in an environment? Anybody want to discuss or share some ideas?
So I'm an English teacher at Gainesville High School, and I have a poetry group as well called Canes on the Mic. And I'm currently teaching Canterbury Tales to my seniors. And I have a class that's overcrowded, over 30 students. And stuff in there, it's, some of the resistance to the work is not even about the work. It's just the logistics of the fact that we're packed in there like sardines and there shouldn't be that many students in the class in the first place. And so because Canterbury Tales, for those who aren't familiar, it's a medieval tale of 24 pilgrims that are going on a pilgrimage. So their journal question was about faith, like discuss your journey of faith or lack thereof. And some of these seniors that sometimes are jaded in this class just started raising their hands and talking about, they lost, this one kid said he lost his faith when his dad committed suicide. And then someone else said, when my mom passed away and I found out that the Catholic priest was doing this, and someone said, I regained my faith in God after my mom passed away. And I was like, a lot of students were talking about their parents passing away. So I said, how many of you guys have lost parents? This was just about 2 days ago. And in the class of about 32, honestly, surprisingly, about half of them had lost parents. And this class is incredibly diverse because JH is the flagship school for ESOL students. So I have students here from Albania, I have a Vietnamese student, I have a student from the Philippines, it's very diverse. And as an educator, with new standards, and because there is an end of course exam happening and all those things, sometimes you feel like you're a failure or you're wasting your time as an educator to let the discussion part before you go on into literature. You feel like a failure saying, I should be just going on to literature now, we should be teaching the literary terms now, we need to cut this discussion short. But hearing what you said about the class in grad school, that's this assignment, and that you said you can't replicate what you do in the classroom. Like true learning is happening there, and I feel like before some of the research, or before the competing globally and all these things happened, educators understood recitation, educators understood stories, and that was a vital part of learning. And just realizing that's a powerful experience. They're going to forget Canterbury Tales, they'll forget Chaucer's background story, but they're going to remember the fact that I was in a class where I lost my dad and my mom, and half of the class also had this experience. And that was one of my recent experiences.
Anyone else?
I just have a question about just how do you all, and in what ways do you collect your story, or what way do you disseminate the story? Because I'm a theater artist and I do applied theater, so that's my thing, personal story. And taking that and making it into either improv work on the spot, or taking it and doing it more as, I know a lot of people do interviews and bring this together as, at least in my role, as a script of some sort. But what ways do you use the arts and, in my role, theater, we have all of us have these stories, and but how do we tell? So that's my question, I guess. How do you guys do it?
Two things that I've done, small scale. Okay, it's not theater. I've done build a story, so I've given people Ziploc bags, pipe cleaner, beads, arts and crafts, glue, scissors, glitter. I've done it both ways. I've given everyone the same thing, so it's kind of like, we're all working with the same stuff.
Yeah.
Or I've made it an unlevel playing field, so to say, and we're all not working with the same stuff. But they have to build a story, and I usually, whatever the question, I have a question about a story about this, and then they have to talk us through it. And I've had everything, like a high school student did like a little heartbeat, and he got his heart broken, and he's like, it dropped really down low, and then it came back up. He was like, my girlfriend dumped me. And another person did like a propeller because their life was about to take off, so that kind of
led them into being able to share.
Correct. And so it gave them, like, for the person who maybe doesn't want to stand up in front of a crowd and just bare their soul, so to say. It gives them a distraction and also a prop to kind of prompt them a little bit. The other thing I've done is I've had people put in a significant life event, and people have had to come up and draw out of the hat and act out other people's moments without speaking.
That's awesome.
So those are two things I've done with groups, is kind of like warm-ups to get people
Yeah.
into the idea.
That's
So
I would say that the closest I've gotten to kind of more of that creative side is that when I'm working with small farmers or folks in like ecotourism or agritourism, those people don't like to tell people what they like. They don't like to share their soul. They're very like guarded people. Like they want to put up walls. They want to go farm their fields, go into town, come back home, and not like they don't want to talk to anybody. They want to be very guarded. And so what I've done is sometimes I make up fictional farmers and tell their stories to help them feel comfortable. So just like knowing, being around the industry long enough, I tried to tailor it towards the group I'm talking to. So like I went up to Pensacola and was talking to a group of agritourism and ecotourism farmers and also like fishermen. And so I created an ecotourism story that was all about like Pensacola and like recovering after the oil spill. And I was a fisherman, and we've been here for 5 generations, and our Emerald Coast. And like I created a fictional story that was applicable to them, so that they could start to see how they could tell their story too. That I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes I feel that people have a hard time in the groups that I've done telling their story if they don't see how it can be done in their situation, in their context, yes. And so...
Was this a written story, or was this something that you enacted? Just wondering.
So I actually, I've developed a curriculum for small farmers based off of the work that Jaron and Brandon have done. And so I've just adapted it to be used for small farmers, and then I adapt it to other audiences, such as fishermen. And so what I do is like I go through the pieces of their and but then, and like all of your pieces of creating a story. But I put the fictional pieces in it. And so I introduced them to this character at the beginning, like, we're going to tell a story about Farmer Joe, and this is all about him. And now let's see how this transfers into his story. And then I have them work on the worksheets for their own story throughout. And usually by the end I can get like at least one person to share their story, but if I would have just asked those groups normally, like, hey, who wants to share their story? Not one of those farmers is going to stand up and tell their story.
Not to get too technical, but it reminds me of like the fusion of plan change, which is the idea there's this bell curve. Whenever there's a new idea or something that's just introduced that is unfamiliar, you're going to have your early innovators, your quick adopters, and then you're going to have your laggards, you know. And so to really implement that change, it's always great to have a change agent. And so in this case, you model the process so that it kind of removes a little bit of that fear of the unknown. But then also that one person who shared that story that's from that community, if they see that one person do it, everybody's on board. Or at least are willing to open up a little bit more and start a dialogue. And so it's really been beneficial. We've been able to do a few workshops with Joy, and it's crazy to see the quietness in the room at the beginning, and then at the end everybody's like, man, I am so excited to start this process.
And something else that I found to be beneficial is that I've used some stories that are, it's called Why I Farm movement. And so it's been really helpful, especially with the agricultural audiences, to show them some of those videos. And a lot of them are more in like the Midwest, large-scale agriculture, but still even small farmers or farmers that are growing produce can connect with them because they have a similar story and like the similar struggles of agriculture. And so I usually show one of those videos because they're very well done, very emotional, like they almost make me cry every time I see them. And so when I showed those to the farmers at first too, they're like, okay, there are people like me, and I can see how this can help other people connect to me.
A quick question. I know that I'm in an organization where a lot of times we get to work with people who have been I guess the way that we're in less fortunate situations than we are for students, for getting an education, whether we're taking loans or everyone else out. We're privileged and we're in this area, but we want to help others. And oftentimes there's this stigma of, like, why should I even listen to you? Like, whether I'm older or, you know, I've had more experience where it's just been more difficult. Why should I listen to this privileged person? And I think story is a great way to get them to open, but I have no idea personally how to do it. I took Tony's undergraduate level course, and I saw how powerful it is to connect with people, but how do you guys think we can get them to even open up to us instead of just kind of brushing us off? It's a heavy question. So.
I think a lot about the human library with that, because an underlying theme of it is that everyone has a story. And you know, when I recruit people to tell their stories at our event, I don't go to, like, you know, famous guest speakers. I ask my friends, my colleagues, and at first they're like, me? I don't have a story. And you know, after a little bit of conversation, we talk about, and I share with them the breadth and the depth of all the types of stories that are shared. And some have a minor level of what we would call everyday hardship and oppression, and then some are like oppression and hardship you can't even imagine, right? But the idea that all of us have experienced hardship, and hopefully all of us have been able to be resilient through that. So I think storytelling can be used to connect, and to, especially if you're in a place where you feel like you're trying to relate to someone and they may initially see you as very privileged and maybe very different from them, being able to connect, all of you have experienced some level of hardship, you know, and so maybe kind of as an icebreaker or something else, saying, hey, you know, let's share something that we've all kind of had a challenge in life. We've done that in our office, even among staff, like what's a childhood struggle you had as a team builder in our meetings, once you kind of know people a little bit. And it's really powerful because you know folks as professionals, and then you hear this thing that they went through in their childhood that you never even thought about. And so again, that connection piece. But if you want to offer to share your story and kind of encourage them to share their story, that might be a great connection.
Yeah, because I mean, whenever it's someone from the outside coming in,
Yeah.
the first barrier you have to break is the barrier of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can share a story and they see a bit of them in you, or they see that passion that you have to just want to help, not to drop off a really, you know, like, this is what you need. No, I'm here because I want to be a part of this. I want to help in some way, shape, or form. That breaks up that barrier, that defensive wall of, I'm not sure if I'm going to let you in. You know, and that human-to-human connection, again, that helps them to understand that you're here because you want to be there, not because of a class or, you know, a certain number of hours you need for community service or something, but you're there for the betterment of them. And so story can and does break that barrier and establish trust.
And just to add, I also think that if you tell your story, is really impactful to, because I'm a lot older than you, and I get that when I work with students, you know, when you guys are me. But if I share my story and my passion, it makes a huge difference.
Because I think you model that vulnerability right
Yes.
off the bat.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Taking my coat off too.
Yeah, and like what Irma says, like depending on what group I'm with, like, I'm very cognizant of what I wear. And it's little, but I'm not going to wear the same thing to present to a college women's basketball team that I'm going to wear when I'm meeting with our kids at Girls Place. I'm going to wear when I meet with donors, or I'm doing a more like board of directors session. So I think you've got to dress the part. I would say.
There's also something to be said for the magic that emerges relative to peer effects, right? I work in spaces in which, to a large extent, no one is going to give a crap about what I have to say, because their experiences, there are barriers that they face that I've never, ever engaged in. I often get questions of, well, what have you been through and how has this happened, and so on and so forth. So there is a certain degree of inability I have in those spaces, because I can't match every experience that everyone has had in order to somehow validate what it is that I have to say. So what I present is just myself, based on the narrative methods that I've kind of adopted and modified for this particular space, is just to be a facilitator, right? I'm just there to help the group do what they're going to do. So every session, every group, it's like a snowflake, right? No two are alike, because it's their experiences that are going to define that particular space. But the icebreaker is often exactly what was said. That's why that totally resonated with me. Is just regardless of what my experience is or whether it does or doesn't match something that is at topic or barriers that are being discussed in that particular group, just being vulnerable is the open space. Like, look, I'm willing. I'm going to be the first one to throw myself out there. And when I'm vulnerable, I mean, I bear stuff that, you know, for a long time it was a big struggle for me because it was shameful, it was embarrassing, it was terrible. It's not, well, you know, I've been through this. No, it was ugly stuff. It was terrible stuff. And these are also closed kind of safe spaces at, you know, in addiction spaces, recovery spaces, things like that. So that's apropos. So I'm kind of dressing for the part in that space. I may not necessarily just open all that up here. I may. We never know, right? You guys may want to leave the room at that point. But I think that's always been, you know, regardless of the space that I've entered into, that always tends to get the ball rolling, is vulnerability, which is really hard. So there you go. Right?
I love how all three of you have talked about really making people feel comfortable and like exposing your own vulnerabilities, and I've kind of done the opposite, which makes me feel like really bad. Maybe I'm being mean to these farmers, but they're a tough crowd. They really are. They're a tough crowd. And so what I've done and found to be successful is sometimes I'll put one picture up first, and it shows like a farmer at a farmer's market who he's dressed in a ratty t-shirt, just looks really run down, his produce isn't labeled, there's no tablecloth on the table, you know, there's like trash cans right beside him with trash piling up. He didn't like put his boxes away or anything. I said, okay, what's this farmer's story? At the very beginning, before we even get into anything. And they start, oh, well, he's no good. They kind of like start slamming him, telling him this awful story. And then I show the next picture of like this beautiful farmer's market's table with these farmers that look well put together, everything's labeled, it looks beautiful. And they tell me that story, and it's all like kagulali. And I said, okay, you guys just made up stories for these two people, and you have no idea what their real stories is. That first guy that you gave a really hard time, you gave him a really hard time in his story, he might actually be really struggling, and maybe he needs help. Maybe you don't know why his stuff looks the way it does. You know, maybe he's just trying to make ends meet. And I said, if you don't tell your story, there's a group of people just like you who are going to tell the story for you, your story for you. And so that kind of like, I don't know if it's a fear tactic or scare tactic, but it usually gets them like realize like, oh, I do need to tell my story because maybe my farm doesn't always look the best. Maybe I could clean it up a little bit, and maybe people are just driving by thinking that I'm just like some scumbag farmer that they shouldn't buy stuff from.
That's awesome. And Kate, I think the biggest thing what everybody's saying is that you've got to go to their level. You've got to meet them wherever they are. And whatever that looks like, that's your challenge to figure out what that is. And if it's trust, vulnerability, if it's tricking them in a very brilliant way. Whatever that is.
I think you made them vulnerable in a way too.
Yeah.
Though. Like, you know,
Totally.
they're big, I'm going to say tough people. And sometimes the easiest way to make someone vulnerable is to realize you might be tough, but it doesn't mean nothing's stopping you.
Yeah.
So whether it's showing that I'm the first one to speak or the last one to speak, I guess I can try to figure out a way to say, I'm vulnerable, but so are you. Because every time I work with them, it's been trying to figure that all out. So thank you guys. This was everybody's.
Thank you all for being a part of it. It was beautiful. We had like one question, like 7 people. So, I did my job. All right. And it's crazy because, you know, when you start talking about story, the first thing that happens is you run out of time. It's 9:48. Like, we probably have enough for, you know, one more question or discussion. And I think a lot of people that are in this room have either started using story or want to start to use story. So I guess starting with the panelists, from your experience of having seen the power of that, if someone is in the audience trying to figure out what's the first thing I can do to kind of get the ball rolling or to try, do you have any suggestions or tips? Maybe what you did first, how it worked, or something that you did later on down the line and figured this works a whole lot better. What would you give that first tidbit of advice for someone?
Mine's super simple. Read their book, follow their guidelines, because really that's what I did, and that's how I modeled the curriculum for the producers, and it's been really effective. And then in whatever situation that you're in, make it applicable to that audience. And so if that means adjusting examples to connect with that audience, that you adapt it for that audience. But that's how I've been successful. It's just really modeling after them.
And kind of one concrete thought process that I had to kind of engage was, there came a juncture at which I had to decide exactly what the work I was doing was going to be. So I kind of occupy multiple spaces, but at one point there was a consideration of whether I was creating a space in which narrative exchange could unfold, and then there was also a space that I kind of took it a step further, and that had a lot of ramifications professionally, and what I had to kind of address in terms of accessing spaces within the hospital and whatnot, in which there were narrative methods that I applied to make the experience interpretive, right? So I was doing something intentional there. So I think in a practical sense, it's, this is all new, right? We're creating value around it. We're defining what this is, what these spaces are, because I sort of kind of maybe know what I do, but I sure couldn't develop a job description for it, right? So it's all kind of forming as we go, and we're all informing that process. So I think, though, that I've found on a practical level that has been one kind of perspective that even like the Department of Integrative Medicine, they define it, that way. Is it a space for creative expression, or is there something interpretive or intentional that you're doing, which then changes how you get to access people and so on and so forth. So that's the decision point, or at least one decision point that I've come across is what is it that you want your intervention to be? So, right? So.
Things that I've learned, I think it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, is like, you've got to know the right questions to ask. So like knowing your audience. Creating the environment, whether it's like when I first started doing it, it's like, you kind of jump right in because you only have so much time, but you've got to prime them. You've got to, whatever that looks like, which we kind of talked about. And then the last thing, and this, working with young girls and even, college age students, it became, and I can't think of a better word to use, kind of a trump game. So sorry.
Awesome.
But like it became like whose story could be the worst, and so kind of being able to tell the kid too, is like nothing's bad happened in your life. That's okay too.
Yes.
That's still a really good story to share, and we need to hear that as well. So kind of laying those ground rules out have been something that I've learned I need to say on the front end. Because I once worked with a team, and one kid waited to go last because she was like, my life's pretty good. Like my parents are together and alive, and I have two little, and she had a, good story to tell, and she was afraid to tell it. So
Maybe because she was last, she was also in a position to.
Well, she could speak up any time, but she waited because she was like, I can't compete with this, So, and maybe that's just also part of working with athletics, is the competition part. But so those are definitely things I've learned.
I kind of bounced off of that when I was TA in the interpersonal leadership course. We saw that a lot. I'm sure you experienced this as a student. You'll have one of the students, you have multiple students that'll say, well, mine's going to be pretty short. And they'll say, they'll start off, well, it wasn't, it's the exact same thing. I had a pretty good life, I had both parents in the home, in college, doing what I love to do. And then, after they're done with their story, there's a part that we can inject where either the students get to ask questions first to help them unpack, because you can tell when someone's guarded. Even if they say that in their life, there's still some ups and downs that they have to overcome. And the students will recognize it, and they'll pick up on it. And usually they'll ask questions where you sit back as a facilitator, you're like, ooh, this is going to be good. I don't think the student was prepared to go there today, And then if the students don't pick up on it, you as the facilitator can ask questions. But when you do that, like as Jana said, you set the environment, you prime everyone within that community to understand that this is a space of trust, this is a space of growth, and it all stays in that space. Like you're not gonna go back and be like, let me tell you what I found out about such and such. That's not the way this works. And you'll find that every classroom experience or every user experience with that's part of this community participant, they keep that trust. They don't use it in a negative way. They don't go out and hurt someone from having heard their story. But now they lean in now. They want to know a little bit more. They're not just classmates, they're friends. And there's one thing I can tell you about that course. We never had a problem with attendance. Students wanted to be there because this was the beginning of every class. We had 2 to 3 students share at the beginning of every class. And so people wanted to go because they wanted to hear the stories of their classmates. They wanted to be friends. The Facebook pages were created. Hugs are always exchanged.
Jaron's on our board now at Girls Place.
I love it. And I'm doing workshops with your staff members and some of your 13-year-old girls. Let me tell you, that is a tough crowd. Because I was approaching you from, college level, and I was like, wait, I'm going to throw this whole workbook away and let's just have a conversation. And the one thing that I've noticed, from not just the staff, but especially the young girls, they want to have this space. They want to talk. They don't want to sit in the room. The way education, unfortunately, is in a lot of spaces, is a dumping mechanism. You're just told, you need to learn this for test, you do this, you make this score. But education that sticks goes back to understanding how to utilize story, making the person within that community be a part of that experience. They're validated when they're allowed to do that. They remember a little bit better. And you were speaking how educators used to understand story back in the day. Well, think about it. Technology has helped us and hurt us. As an educator, you have the advantage of having a PowerPoint, a Prezi, YouTube, or some other mechanism helps you deliver information outside of having to explain yourself. When you inject story, or if you cut off the PowerPoint presentation, now it's, am I really a good communicator? How do I tell the story of the information I'm trying to give? And there are tons of benefits from that. And so I think that you all have figured out a way to turn off the projector, or if the projector is on, it's to facilitate communication and dialogue. And I think that you don't lose when you're in that space or when you're trying to implement stories.
One thing that I just experimented with actually like 2 weeks ago was with the team, and I had the PowerPoint, we watched the TED Talk, we was setting it all up. And before diving into the whole sharing stories, I just put like a 6-minute meditation on, turned the lights off, they laid down, and it's like, okay, so it's a guided meditation, but you need to be preparing yourself. This is where we're going. So it kind of gave them time to get ready, so to say. I didn't know how it was going to go, but it went really well. They were very excited. I'm sure most of them slept for 6 minutes, but that's fine.
Once you get a rest, you get back to that space. Yeah.
So, just another idea.
All right, well, I want to first thank the panelists and the audience for the participants for all of us being an active part of this experience, this panel discussion. So I think we all have to move ourselves around. So the next part of StoryGNV, we have a quick break. So from 10 o'clock until 10:30, we have more breakfast and snacks available out in the front, but it's also a networking break. So if there are people within here, within the room that you really want to connect with, network, and figure out how you can collaborate, please do so. Also, we have Chalk Talks, which are on the back of your program. We have 4 tables that are lined up along that front walkway. And a Chalk Talk really allows a community to answer a series of questions to help you to engage and critically think on how we can improve our community. Now, when you answer these questions, you can build off of things that other people have written. Like if you really enjoy what someone says, yes, give them kudos, put some exclamation marks there. Be creative, but the key thing is we don't speak. So you just think, you reflect, and then you write however you would like on those. So feel free to experience that. To continue to network, you can ask others, that have done different tracks, how they felt about everything, and what did they learn, and maybe, exchange some information in terms of what you learned here. Thank you all again for being a part of the panel discussion. If you have any questions, you can contact me or any of our panelists, and we'll continue to grow the community story. And thank you all again.
Thank you all.